works. Yeah? I feel a bit like an imposter, especially after Dan's great profound remarks, because I was only in the Herschlag group for a very short time, and my phylogeny is sort of in between Dan's PhD thesis and I guess PET, so I branched out from there after about half a year because I had already pre-arranged my PhD, and although I loved the time here, I had to leave with a sad heart, and probably benefited more from the stay than Dan and the team benefited, but I still enjoyed it very much. And I thought, since that goes a long way back, that was in '94, I'll rekindle the spirit of the mid-early 90s. So this is my offer letter over here, and it tells us something about the criteria that were applied at the time to get into Dan's lab. Here. That was the criterion to get into Dan's lab. And that's how I got it. And then I think Dan wanted to make, as he said, he wanted to make the lab a nice place. And one of the perks of the job was that he had a very large car. And apparently it only cost $250, I read yesterday. And when I arrived, it was used for the cats. So there was a lot of cat hair in the back. And it was a car as big as a ship. And you see here my mum who visited, who loved it, because in the 50s, these were the cars that every German dreamt of, and German cars by that time had already shrunk back to efficiency, and this was not efficient, but it was very beautiful. And little did I know what else was behind it, because only when I looked at the photos, I found out that there's actually a conspiracy behind all of this. Look at this. So it's a black car with cats or cat hair in the back. The number is 666, and there's a Clinton Gore sticker. So I tell Fox News, and you see it tomorrow at the news. So the liberal entomology elite is gathered here. So next feature of Dan's lab was that it was an all-female lab. And so one of the first things that Dan said to me was that we should engage in male bonding. And that was a technical term that I didn't understand. I thought he wants to chain me to the bench. And I had to declare that that is not what he meant. I'm not entirely sure what he meant, so I didn't just engage in male bonding, but the lab was predominantly female. It was only females in that. And this is our slumber party, where I had my only face mask in my lab. So it was Debbie and Peter, I guess, and Suzanne had just joined before, so that was the time, and then Karen came, and Ree and Vidya. Okay, so I branched off genetically in this direction, but some of the work that we did in my group was based on two important pieces of work from Petter O'Brien. That was the observation that in the alkaline phosphatase superfamily there are promiscuous activities in alkaline phosphatase, and then something that looked like a review but was more a concept paper, where the sort of vague idea of promiscuity and its role in evolution was specified and related to mechanistic features. So a decade later or so, when we started to try to evolve enzymes based on promiscuity, we looked at the other end of the alkaline phosphatase superfamily in an area where you find sulfatases and something that turns out as diesterases and phosphonate monoesterases. And we checked the promiscuity and wanted to know whether you can have a situation where more reactions are enclosed in a shorter activity range. Because for evolution, that would be necessary. Here, the alkaline phosphatase has a 10 to the 9 or something like difference to the next best activity, and for evolution, that's a large barrier. So we characterized sulfatases and phosphonate monoisohydrolases, and the activities here in addition of the log scale are within a much smaller range. And one can explain that by a number of features, but one is that the active site nucleophile is not a serine like an alkaline phosphatase, but a form of glycine that can be effectively recycled by forming an ester bond as an intermediate to whatever substrate it's challenged with, and then the reaction back to the active nucleophile is a hemiacetal cleavage that is the same effectively for anything that is sitting on on this oxygen over there, whether it's a sulfate or phosphate leaving group, the second step of the reaction is effectively unified. The rate accelerations are large, and the range in which they come is smaller. You can find 4 sort of chemically distinct activities within 100-fold in K capital Km. So it looked like something that could be a good starting point for direct evolution. And so Short-Mouton tried to evolve this phosphonate hydrolase activity out of a sulfatase. And she set up at the time a low-tech colony screen where we used the color indication reaction to check reaction progress. The range of the activities was still too large to start adaptive evolution, so she started with a neutral drift where you select for the original activity and diversify your library, and then started adaptive rounds, and in 9 months evolution she could change the activity for this new promiscuous activity that was by about 100,000 fold. So it turns out to be one of the better direct evolution experiments. And now let's look at what happens to the individual activity. So that the activity evolved for phosphonate hydrolase goes up by a lot, but the original activity decreases just a bit. And the 2 other bystander activities, phosphodiester and monoesters, they don't change that much. So paradoxically, by evolving something, we've made a generalist. That was something maybe you wouldn't expect, because you think that evolution should always specialize. In this case, it didn't. When we sequence, you find activities all throughout the protein, but significantly nothing in the kind of direct active site. And you would maybe have hoped or wished for something that changes mechanism in a direct way, where you see new functional groups that would be producing something that wasn't there before. That didn't happen. We got structures of the intermediate evolution, and the main feature here is that you're changing this part of the active site. The active site nucleophile is over here, but you're changing actually something that's fairly remote from it, and you make the active site bigger. So we really wanted to know which interactions are improved or enhanced, and use the insight from Newton studies that the free energy relationship is the slope in a Bronsted plot is dependent on the efficiency of the general acid catalyst in the active site. So when we take out the general acid catalyst from the sulfatase and turn it into alanine, then the slope in the Bronsted plot becomes steeper, and that means the charge offset that is on the leaving group becomes less efficient. And we use that to probe what happens in evolution. And then and the groups of question here are the cysteine and the lysine in the active site. And so then we constructed trade relationships for the different mutants throughout that evolutionary trajectory, from wild type in green to sort of turquoise over there. And it turns out that the slopes change with evolution. The new activity becomes shallower in its slope. That means the efficiency of general acid catalysis or electrostatic catalysis becomes better, and the original activity suffers a bit, and the bystanders activity don't change much in free energy relationship. So the simplest explanation is that you have more space in the active site and fewer constraints, and then we validate this to some extent with docking. The phosphonate monoester is spatially more demanding, so you're creating degrees of freedom for these non-reacting groups to rotate further in. And then at the other end of the molecule, the proximity to general acid catalyst becomes more efficient for protein transport for electrostatic catalysis. We showed this as a ground state effect, partially because we didn't trust our theoretical collaborator to inform us about transition states. So it's an effect that we see in the ground state. There's more space available, and that must be realized by the selection for catalysis in the transition state as well. Now, some of this work was reviewed by Dan. In 2008, he provided no less than, I think, 35 different points, and in the spirit of being helpful, thank you very much for that. And of course, he revealed that he is the author of the review to support accountability, but if you read any of these sentences, you can tell. and in particular, the seriousness that he showed in his intro comes out to this review, because he says, the authors may disagree with what I say, but they will be judged by their presentation. So, this spirit of getting it right, I mean, it was always there. Well, okay, so the last paper that came out on that was also, as it turns out, edited by Dan at PNAS. And there was just one sentence as a commentary. So I wonder whether the standards are slipping there. Right? But I was glad that you said that, but I wasn't sure whether you just didn't have enough time or where this 60th birthday that. Okay, how many minutes do I have left? 10? 2? 2 or 10? All right, I'll do 5. I thought this is a quantitative plan. Anyway, stop me whenever you. Okay, so we wanted to get more efficient in our screening because, as you know, many direct evolution campaigns don't really proceed. There are problems with this law of diminishing returns, that evolution sometimes ends up in a local minimum, and often there are problems with the assay, how to do with dynamic range, with indirect assays and so on. So while direct evolution definitely deserves a Nobel Prize, it's by no means kind of a closed case that works in every instance. And one of the problems was practical, because it's very hard to make to perform a large number of assays. And we then adapted a system that existed in a previous incarnation in these studies over here by turning to microfluidics to create water and oil emulsion reactors, where each of these microcompartments is defined by DNA, by identifier that's in there. You co-compartmentalize with the DNA the phenotypically responsible molecule of the protein, and then look for an optical readout to report on the data in large populations. And to do this so the previous studies here had been done in polydispersed emulsion formats, where you mix water and oil and you get emulsion compartments, but they're all different sizes. And we then turned to microfluidics to make relatively simple microfluidic devices, droplets in a monodispersed way, and do that very fast. So if an aqueous sample comes in through such a channel, it's kind of broken off by oil channels that come in from perpendicular directions, and then you make droplets, and you make them very fast, about 10 to the 3 droplets per second, and 10 to the 8 droplets per day, and they're highly monodispersed. This is a typical device. You can make these PDMS devices yourself. It's a process of trial and error, where trying out designs is much more powerful than fluid dynamics here. So for neophytes to go in, it's fruitful. And this is connected to pumps around it that are through channels that are certified biopsy punches. And this is a PCR machine that we built for complicated workflows. And here are the things that you can do. So for enzymology, this is a reaction turnover that works, but you can also do PCR. You can in vitro express proteins, you can grow cells, and you can grow worms or organisms, and do in principle any reaction that you can do in a test tube as well in this form. Now then we can think about miniaturizing more complex workflows, and there are kind of modules that you can combine to implement rather large, more complicated workflows, and the modules are made by a number of individuals that are here, and we adapted them and designed some ourselves. And one experiment I want to show you is how we use that to find promiscuous activities in metagenomic samples. So it's a very simple workflow where we make droplets, store them offline, and then analyze what happened in these droplets after a number of days, 3 to 4 days. And what is in these droplets, we take a metagenomic library from environmental samples, transform it into E. coli, then using Poisson distribution, one bacterium goes into each droplet together with substrate and with lysis reagent. The lysis reagent liberates the plasmid as well as the protein, and if it's a good catalyst, it turns over to product. And that product is then, if you use a fluorogenic phosphate or sulfate, lighting up. And using inbuilt electrodes, you can use the electrophoretic effects to steer the good droplets into one direction and not in the other. If you we don't want. The library that we use is actually a combination of many different libraries, and these are kind of numbers that you could probably screen with liquid handling system or other things. And we could combine all of them to screen about 1 million of clones with 10 to 100 for redundancy. And what we've seen over here is the kind of selection process where if something lights up, the electrodes are activated and then bring them in the good channel. And we use as bait activities triesterases and sulfatases to demonstrate that relatively easy promiscuous reactions and hard ones can be found. So we generate droplets at 6 kilohertz, we sort at 1 kilohertz, and we analyze 10 to the 7 droplets in 3 hours. And then you get a distribution function and sequences. So we find 8 triesterases in this case. Some are familiar from the literature where triesterases have been said to emerge from lactinases, but the more interesting hits are the ones that are away from the already known enzymes. And this is, I think, what this approach can provide. And we, in this case, found a cysteine protease, which was the first metal-free triesterases. The registrations are good, and the catalysts are promiscuous, validating to go in with these bait substrates that are relatively non-specific. And it seems to be sort of a rough correlation to whatever bait substrate you use, you get substrate with a similar charge. So it's not a sophisticated detection system, but one that kind of separates separates active sites with high reactivity from those that don't have it. Okay, so do you have 20 more minutes or? Okay, so for those who want to use this, there are simpler devices as well, and this is a double emulsion system where you don't have to build your own sorter, but can make one droplet first and then a second droplet around it, and that is fact sortable, for example. So I think these techniques are relatively easy to adapt. And with that, I probably should finish and just thank Dan for having me for Chopin in his lab. This is what I found on in the first week on my desk. An unnamed person had put a post-it to it. I hope you find a good life at Stanford. I did find it. I think it's probably Suzanne, but she probably didn't want to sign it. Okay. So on the whole, I'll opt for model 1. So, thanks very much.
So how big are the droplets actually? What's the scale? Can you tune their size?
Yeah, we use 15 micrometers normally. 15, yeah. But you can make them smaller if you go below 5, then dust is a problem with the channels. But you can make it smaller if you work very cleanly. And the biggest ones we have are 200 microns, where we do mammalian cell-based selections with stem cells and so on, where they have to be a bit larger.
So maybe I didn't get it all, but it looked like you were using the pKa dependence of the rate as a measure of efficiency of general acid catalysis. So when you saw the more shallow slope, you were interpreting that as more proton transfer to the leaving group. I guess my question is it possible that other things are getting better and you're not actually making the general acid better? It's just you have actually less proton transfer and less bond breaking to the leaving group, and that's the reason for that.
It's possible. Yes, it's possible for the mutants, for the mutants found in direct evolution. For the Allen mutants, we've got isotope effects, and that suggests that the reaction remains dissociated with all the producers for isotope effects, where we might not be fully confident, but at least the isotope effects look like they're remaining dissociated.
Yes, Natalie. How stable are your droplets across temperature? Have you tested different temperature ranges? Could you incubate them at a high temperature, for example?
Yes, you can find formulations that do that. One problem with the droplets is that things do leak out. We use fluorous oils, but things are still sequestered for entropic reasons because they don't want to be in water, and then they need to go with fluorous oils. So if you have a product that you want to capture that doesn't suffer that problem because it's very polar, for example, then you can heat the droplets to 89 degrees and there's no problem with it. But if leaking is a problem, it becomes worse. And leaking can be also made better or worse by surfactants, and the surfactants that allow you to be temperature stable are often bad at leaking. So it's kind of so I'm saying you can find practical solutions for optimizing that, but not for every particular reactor you look at, you might have a solution there. But in principle, they are stable. We do heat inactivators, for example, with 50, 60 degrees with normal surfactant solutions.
I didn't understand your explanation for why sulfatases should be more specific, or more promiscuous.
Okay.
Could you either say it again louder, or?
Speak louder, yeah. So my explanation was, is that you have two steps at the promiscuous reaction, and the enzyme has to satisfy. And if the second reaction requires the same mechanism of catalysis, which is to extract the protein from the hemiacetal, and then just kicking out the leaving group with a relatively similar pKa, then you only have to be promiscuous for the first step, but not for the second step. So you can imagine a promiscuous scenario where you are promiscuous but just for a single turnover, not for multiple turnovers.
I think that model would predict that you have low KMs for promiscuous substrates for the other enzyme, which I don't think is observed. Right, in other words, if you have a trial problem with the second step, you're going to get stuck there and be able to do the first turnover and almost make like a suicide activator.
Uh-huh. Okay, good.
Right. We should
I have to
talk
think about it, yes.